The Curse of Timur. It was June 1941 when a team of Soviet anthropologists, led by Mikhail Gerasimov, ventured to open the tomb of Timur, the legendary Turco-Mongol conqueror, also known as Tamerlane, in Samarkand, Uzbekistan. The mission, which was ordered by Joseph Stalin himself, was to confirm whether the tomb actually belonged to the conqueror and to study his remains. As they carefully uncovered the grave, they discovered an inscription that would later become infamous. "Whomsoever opens my tomb shall unleash an invader even more terrible than myself." Less than a week after the tomb was opened, Nazi Germany, under Adolf Hitler, launched Operation Barbarossa, a full-scale invasion of the Soviet Union. As they opened the tomb, a peculiar smell filled the air, and technical difficulties began to plague their equipment. Lights flickered, and the electricians were unable to explain the malfunction. While these events might have been dismissed as coincidence, they added to the growing sense of unease among the crew. Before the tomb was opened, 3 elderly men reportedly approached Sadriddin Aini, a member of the expedition, at a local tea house. They handed him a manuscript warning of a curse that would be unleashed if the tomb was disturbed. The men begged Aini not to open the tomb, but he dismissed their concerns, believing the curse was merely a local legend designed to protect the tomb from grave robbers. Aini even used a stick to shoo them away, dismissing their warning as superstitious nonsense. Despite the warnings, the tomb was opened. The crew continued their work, and within days the invasion of the Soviet Union began. The timing was nothing short of uncanny. On June 22, 1941, Nazi Germany launched Operation Barbarossa, one of the largest military invasions in history, which signaled the beginning of a brutal conflict on the Eastern Front. The Soviets had just uncovered the remains of one of the greatest conquerors in history, and now they were facing a massive threat from another. As the war raged on, rumors of the curse spread, and some began to believe that Timur's grave had indeed been disturbed at a terrible cost. Stalin, perhaps feeling the weight of the superstition, ordered that the remains of Timur be returned to his tomb. In November 1942, after Timur's body was reburied with full Islamic rites, the situation began to change. The Soviet Union achieved its first major victory in the Battle of Stalingrad, a turning point in World War II. This victory was seen by many as a sign that the curse had been broken. According to one version of the story, the aircraft that carried Timur's remains even flew over the battlefield of Stalingrad, reinforcing the idea that the curse had been lifted and the tide of the war had shifted in favor of the Soviets. The tragic story of Robert Todd Lincoln. It was 1865 when Robert Todd Lincoln, the eldest son of President Abraham Lincoln, first became familiar with the relentless shadow of death. At 22, he declined an invitation to Ford's Theater, where his father was fatally shot by John Wilkes Booth on April 14th. Rushing to the Peterson house, Robert arrived just in time to witness his father's final moments the next morning. However, this was only the beginning of a life filled with tragedy. Robert had already lost one brother, Edward, in childhood, and another, William, who died in the White House in 1862 at just 11 years old. His last surviving brother, Thomas, Tad, passed in 1871 at 18. His mother, Mary Todd Lincoln, also suffered severe mental and financial decline, leading Robert to commit her to an asylum before she died in 1882. But beyond his personal losses, Robert's life became eerily tied to 3 presidential assassinations. By 1881, Robert had risen to the role of Secretary of War under President James A. Garfield. On July 2, 1881, he was just 40 feet away when Charles Guiteau shot Garfield at Washington's Baltimore and Potomac train station. Rushing to the president's side, Robert took swift action, ensuring medical personnel arrived and securing the scene. He later recalled how the incident reminded him of his father's assassination, lamenting, "How many hours of sorrow I have passed in this town." After 80 days of suffering, Garfield succumbed to his wounds on September 19th. Robert's ominous connection to presidential deaths continued in 1901. By then, he had left public office, worked as a private attorney, and served as U.S. Minister to the Court of St. James. James. While vacationing with his family in New Jersey, he stopped in Buffalo to visit the Pan American Exposition. That same evening, Robert received a telegram informing him that President William McKinley had been shot by anarchist Leon Czolgosz. He immediately went to visit McKinley, who initially seemed to be recovering. But days later, McKinley died from infection, and Vice President Theodore Roosevelt assumed the presidency. By this point, Robert's presence at or near presidential assassinations had gained an eerie reputation. Though he wasn't there when his father was shot, he had witnessed Garfield's attack and arrived in Buffalo the night McKinley was gunned down. Rumors of a curse followed him, and he reportedly once remarked, "If only they knew, they wouldn't want me there." However, this quote remains unverified. After McKinley's death, Robert distanced himself from politics. His final public appearance came in 1922 at the dedication of the Lincoln Memorial, where he stood alongside President Warren G. Harding, who would later die in office, though under natural circumstances. On July 26, 1926, Robert Todd Lincoln died just days before his 83rd birthday. Though a successful statesman and businessman, his life remained inextricably linked to tragedy, leaving behind a legacy overshadowed by the deaths of American presidents. The luckiest, unluckiest man in the world. It was August 6, 1945, when Tsutomu Yamaguchi found himself in Hiroshima for what was supposed to be a routine business trip. The morning sun had barely climbed into the sky when, at precisely 8:15 a.m., an overwhelming flash of light swallowed the city. In an instant, everything around him turned into chaos. The United States had just dropped the first atomic bomb. Yamaguchi, standing just 2 miles from the epicenter, was hurled to the ground by the sheer force of the explosion. The heat seared his skin, leaving severe burns on his face and arms. Buildings crumbled, fires erupted, and the sky darkened with smoke and debris. Around him, thousands of people were instantly incinerated. Against all odds, he survived. Dazed and injured, Yamaguchi struggled through the devastated city, desperate to escape. His only thought was to return home, to Nagasaki. The journey was grueling. He endured unimaginable pain, hunger, and the haunting sight of burned and dying victims. But somehow, after nearly 200 miles of suffering, he made it back. On August 9th, still bandaged and weak, Yamaguchi reported for work at the Mitsubishi shipyard in Nagasaki. He recounted his horrifying experience to his supervisor, who listened in disbelief. "One bomb destroyed an entire city? Nonsense," the man scoffed. Before Yamaguchi could protest, a blinding flash filled the sky. Again, another deafening explosion rocked the ground. The second atomic bomb had just detonated over Nagasaki. The blast shattered windows, collapsed buildings, and sent Yamaguchi tumbling to the floor. He had survived a nuclear explosion for the second time in 3 days. Fearing for his wife and child, Yamaguchi rushed through the burning ruins of the city. Miraculously, he found them alive. His wife had stepped outside to buy ointment for his burns when the bomb struck, and she had taken cover in a tunnel. Once again, fate had spared his family. Despite suffering from severe radiation poisoning, Yamaguchi lived on. He endured sickness, burns, and long-term health effects, yet he never let his trauma consume him. Instead, he became a passionate advocate against nuclear weapons, dedicating his life to warning the world about their devastating power. Yamaguchi lived to be 93 years old, carrying with him the scars of history's deadliest bombings. Some call him the luckiest man alive. That's all for this video. We hope you have found this video informative and interesting. Subscribe to us, thanks. Thank you for watching our video.